as well. So we're recording. So Caleb, I don't know how you want to do that, but I've got the text set up.
No, I think so. It's recording right now.
Uh-huh.
All right. Well, if we're getting started, I think, what's the date today? Today is March
20th.
March 20th, 2016, the day the Provo City Center Temple was dedicated, for any reference. We
Push it down. Push the black thing down.
We're here and we're hoping to discuss Grandpa Dean's parents. Were there any particular parents in mind? Was it
Bill and Norma?
Both of them. Okay. And that's the goal and intention of this family tree gathering, is for an interview of that nature. So Grandpa Dean, if you want to get started, I think I'm going to start Zoom on here too. I'll mute your thing, but just in case anyone else comes on.
Sure, you can chat with him and stuff. Perfect.
Okay, now if any of you have any questions or comments, why, because it's hard to know when you're going to have just a few minutes to talk about this, what you should cover and maybe what you should leave out. So I hope that this gives you a good idea. Dad was born in 1901, and he grew up with five sisters and one brother. Now, he was the younger than a lot of his sisters. A lot of his sisters were much older than him, and so as I grew up, as a little boy at 5 or 6, I had, teenage cousins that were 17, 18 years old. So I didn't associate much with them, and they didn't associate much with me. But the families were large enough that there were always children that were my age. So Dad went through all of the schools in Davis County. He graduated from Davis High School. Even back then, he would have been in his mid-teens, and Davis High School was in existence, and North Davis was in existence, and that's what was the two high schools. As he grew up, this was a farming community. There weren't many over 1,000 people in Bountiful at that time, and the homes in what we call Plat A, which is the center part of town, were really spaced out when he was born, and the people had farms around their property. And as time went on, the farms would get divided up a little bit, and we saw a lot of that even born, much of that happening. But he went through the Davis school districts, and I have his D book here. You can look at these after, but I have his D book when he graduated from Davis High School, and it's kind of a little bit leather bound, and very simply done, but it's interesting. As I say, this was a farming community, and not only did they grow the crops here, but they also bottled so much and did so many things for future use. They would bottle, things that were going to last practically all winter till land came up.
Peaches and
But-
pears and cherries.
What?
Peaches and pears.
Yeah,
And cherries. And
peaches, pears, cherries, blackberries. Blackberries were a big product of the Bountiful area back in those days. But the family home, with this many people in it, why you were bedded down with someone else most of the time, but actually, Dad didn't get too old until his older brothers and sisters started getting married, and so he wasn't, like I say, too old until such time as the family started to diminish as far as those that were using that home. Oh.
Sure.
did you fall or did you pass out? No, it's fell. Keep going, Dean.
Well, let's stop for a minute.
Well,
Just a minute. Why don't you roll over on your knees? That's easiest for me. Hold on.
Let's move this.
the Bamberger Railroad.
Just a minute. I'm okay.
Do we need some help there?
No, go ahead.
The Bamberger Railroad came in early in the 1900s, and the farmers here started shipping a lot of the produce by railroad, and they'd pick it pretty green so that it would ripen between here and wherever it went. And also, back then, of course, everything was, to begin with, things were just wagon and horses. And so they would still go to Salt Lake and sell their produce and so on. And what would happen is the horses got used to the road back and forth. And so the farmers would all say that they were able to get in the back of the wagon and take a nap and not worry about coming home because the horses knew the way. So it was a whole different life, and that's how Dad grew up. But he went to the University of Utah, and he graduated in 1924, and his yearbook that he graduated is here. You can see his picture in his cap and gown. And he got out of school, and the Davis High School and the Davis School District weren't able to use any history teacher, and he graduated in history, and they didn't need a history teacher. So Dad thought, well, I guess maybe I'll have to do something for a while or something else. And then the superintendent called him and said, Mr. Matheson, the history teacher at Parowan High School, has resigned, and he is going, so next year they will have an opening there, and he's going back to law school. And so if you would like that job, they would be thrilled to interview you. So he drove down to Cedar City or down to Parowan and interviewed. And they said, you're you're perfect for what we want. So we'll give you the job. So he started his career after graduating from college, and that was the same fall. He graduated and went to Parowan and started teaching. The school district included Cedar City, so he taught a year or so there, maybe 2 years. I'm not sure what it was, but then he went over to Cedar City and to the junior high there, and that's where he finished his career down there. And they called him back here in 1927 to start the school year in the fall of 27. So so that was his career down there. But the thing that happened is he they asked him if he'd be in a play or two, and he said, "Oh, sure." So he started being in a couple of the plays down in there, which included Cedar City and Parowan. You know, they weren't that far apart, and so he got in one play with a girl named Norma Webster, and he kind of took a liking to her, and she lived in Cedar City, but she was in this play, and then when he got transferred to Cedar City, why, boy, that was great. Now he was down where she lived. And so they started going together and so on, and she had graduated from the Branch Agricultural College. She had a lot of friends, and we'll talk more about her later, but she and he fell in love, and so in 1927 he was through down there, and they came up here to Bountiful to go to the temple and get married in the Salt Lake Temple. Now, this is the first time that my grandparents, his parents, had ever seen her, and didn't know her at all. And here he brings home the girl that he's going to marry. So anyway, my grandmother used to say, we couldn't have been more delighted. He brings home this beautiful girl to get married in the temple. What more can we ask? And comes from a family well thought of in Cedar City, the Webster family. Now, the Webster family goes back to the founding of Cedar City, actually. So they were well known down there, and the Lay family and the Webster family married together. And there's still a Lay Motors in Cedar City that's still left over from when the first automobiles came about. Well, actually, it started when it was when they shoed horses, and fixed wagons, and so on. So it's been around a long time. But that's the background that she came from, and he brought her up here. Well, this was a whole new place for her, but he introduced her around and let him know about the people that he'd grown up with here. Of course, he'd been away for 2 or 3 years anyway. But she got to know people quite rapidly, and they had only been here a year, and they started their home, which is down on First South. It's still there. They started their home and moved in down there. And he started teaching at the junior high school over in Bountiful here, South Davis Junior High, which included everything from included Farmington, and went to the county line when you went into Salt Lake. So that was the area that was covered by the junior high school. He taught there for only a couple of years, just to give you his teaching history. And they transferred him up to Davis to teach world history and one class in American problems. He taught up at Davis High School, and of course was a teacher there even when I was, and Elaine and I were going to high school up there. And I said to him, Dad, what would happen if I ever got you as a teacher? How would that be? And he says, don't worry about it. The principal knows that you're coming. And he says, you won't be in any of my history classes. So the grandchildren weren't able to make that choice, but I was able to make the choice, and I went through high school and up there, and Dad taught high school, and we worked on the farm. I got taken off the farm by the doctors when I was after my 9th grade. And Dad, at that time also had more time in the summers because of the way the farm was run. And so we worked together up at the Miller Floral Company. I watered plants, and he helped repair the glass that was broken in all the glass houses. But anyway, after he got out of high school and as I say, ended up at Bountiful High School. When Bountiful High School was built, then he came down here and ran the bookstore, and also taught history at Bountiful High until he retired. Now, I want to go back to when I was in the 1st grade and give you another avenue of his history. He went to a Democratic meeting which was being held, and they needed someone to run for Justice of the Peace. Well, then the Justice of the Peace was just one of the people in town that was usually they had some law training or something, and they'd run. But anyway, they put him. They asked him if he'd run for Justice of the Peace, and he said, "Well, I don't know anything about the law." He said, you better find somebody that's really oriented the law a little bit. They says, well, no, we don't have anybody, and if it's all right, we're going to put your name up. Well, he got elected. And he was the justice of the peace for 12 years. The 12 years I was in school, from first grade till I graduated from high school, he was the justice of the peace. And some of the high school students, the high school students that lived around here, you know, they would say, "Oh, look, there's the little judge." So I got called the little judge quite often down here by high school students that had him in high school. But he'd only been the justice of the peace, and what he did to start with. Back then, you could pass the bar examination without ever going to college. All you had to do was study the law and know it, and you could pass the bar. So there was a place called the Blackstone School of Law, and he sent to them and got a book on the law and legal terminology. He had just got started in that book, and it was 6 months after he'd been made the justice of the peace. And a man came through Bountiful, and he killed a farmer who was out irrigating. He shot at 3 or 4 other people, and they captured him. And so here he was, 6 months into learning the law, and was going to have to preside over a trial for a murderer. And so first of all, they had a hearing, and they got a judge out of Salt Lake to defend him, who was the most well-known defense lawyer in town, in Salt Lake. And anyway, so they had a preliminary hearing on this, which they have to do to show they have enough evidence to try him for murder. And the court was held in the Bountiful First Ward building. That was the only place they could figure they could hold court and have it. So it was held in the church building. What they did during the trial, the attorney for the other side said, "I think that there is something the matter with the gentleman that you're prosecuting here, and I would like him to have a medical examination." They gave him a medical examination and found out he had a brain tumor. Now, the reason that the other judge wanted to do that is he said, "You know, this man lived such a good life and was such an upstanding citizen until he did this. We knew something was wrong." So to make a long story short, he died in the home in American Fork. And he died 1 year later in American Fork. And so he was never prosecuted, of course, for that. But before the preliminary hearing, they didn't have any place to keep his gun and all the evidence that they had on him. So it was kept in our closet. And
he shot East and his wife just east of the cemetery. They were both in the field.
Yeah, they were both in the
Them
field.
both.
They were both killed. I was thinking that she just got wounded. Okay, they were both killed, but anyway, they were both out in the field, and you could see their flashlight. That's why he did it. So appreciate that. But anyway, up till that preliminary hearing, I don't think my mother ever slept. She worried about somebody breaking into the house to steal the evidence was hidden in our closet. But anyway, from that point on, most of the cases that he tried for the 12 years, he didn't have any cases such as that. Most of them were speeding cases and so on, and he did a lot of marriages. He performed a lot of marriages. Some of them, and I don't know why, some of them were late at night, like 10 o'clock at night and so on, because he would have to go get a neighbor to come over, and my mother and the neighbor would be the witnesses. So he did everything that had to be done, and was in there for, like I say, 12 years. And I still have 2 of his old dockets downstairs where he would show everything, and then at the end it would say how much money that he was to receive for having handled the case. And a lot of times it was like $1.50. It didn't ever amount to much, depending on what he had to do.
So I think, Norma, Jean, are you on the phone with us now?
Yes, I am. And I was, first thing I was going to say is make sure that Dean tells about when he was Justice of the Peace, because our lives were very interesting there. And in terms of the late night weddings, if you've ever watched a World War II movie and a soldier is going to be going overseas and they go out and get married before he goes late at night, that's what some of them were, because it was during that time. And yes, he would go and get either Aunt Polly or Ruth Parkin across the street, and they'd come over. So sometimes in these movies you see a lady with her curlers in her hair and who got out of bed to come and witness the wedding. And so I remember at least a couple of them were that, with a serviceman leaving. So, and I wanted to make sure that some of those experiences were there, because I think Dean and I both have very active memories of some of the things that happened, during those years.
That's great. It's great to have you here. We're recording all of this, so this is really important. Thanks for coming.
Do you have anything else you want to connect here?
No, I don't have anything else about that. I had, since there's so many musical people in the family, I did have a music anecdote that I wanted to share about your grandpa, or our dad, because we never thought of him as the musical member of the family, which he wasn't. Our mother was, and but he encouraged the rest of us. But one fall, when I was coming out there in October, my mother said, is there something you'd like to do? And I said, yes, I'd like to go hear the orchestra play. And she said, well, they're not playing now, but there's an opera at the Capitol Theater. And so the 2 of them and I we had dinner at the Marriott, and then we went to the opera, and it was Lucia de Lammermoor. And Dad had never shown any interest in classical music, really, and attending or playing, but he sat there, and we were way up in the balcony, and when intermission came, I turned to him and said, what do you think, Dad? And I thought he was going to say, well, I'll be glad when it's over, but he didn't. He said, well, I'll tell you, the next time I come, I'm going to get a better seat, and I'm going to read the story before I come. So I thought he was realizing that there was maybe something he'd been missing. And so that was just something I thought might surprise the rest of you. And no, I just have, very good memories of feeling safe and knowing what a good provider and how much he took care of and took care of us. And one of the things that I often think of him is when I'm working outside, because he and I were both happiest when we were out working in the dirt, planting or growing. And I still have really nice memories of the spring planting and working with him on that. And also all the service that he did in the town and in the church. I don't think he ever said no to anything and always did a good job. So, and our mother too, one of the things she always emphasized is be dependable. If you say you'll do something, do it. And if you don't think you're going to do a good job of it, don't say yes. So anyway, we had a good life, didn't we, Dean?
That's right. Yes.
Mm-hmm. But I heard a lot of your story there about about that trial, and I remember what I don't know that I remember the time. And what year was that?
Well, that would have been in 1932.
Okay, so that's the year I was born. But I grew up hearing the story. I don't think I remember the trauma in the house as it was going on, but you would. Yeah.
I was 6 years old. I remember that.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, you'd remember. So, yeah. So I'm glad you shared that. And it's nice to hear your voices. So who's there?
Well, all the family, name them off.
The 4 daughters.
Yeah, all 4 daughters.
Okay. Good.
Husbands. Rebecca's here.
Oh, Rebecca's there. Oh, last time I saw Rebecca was on her wedding day, I think.
Caleb is
The one that gets us going.
Caleb is the one that's spearheading all this history.
Okay. Very good.
So
Very good.
So Dean has some more notes. So as he's going along with them, you should feel free to jump in.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay, I will if there's anything more that I could add, but
yeah. Well, no, I'm sure.
I want to listen.
Okay.
Okay. Well, Norma Jane and I grew up with gardens all around the home because our great-grandfather was one of the first ones in Bountiful, settled in Bountiful, and owned property. So east of our home, clear up the block, was usually a tomato patch. Across the street where the grandparents' home was on the corner, there was a big garden over there that went halfway through the block. And up to the corner, up on the corner was a great big barn that when I was little was that's where the horses would be kept, and once in a while they would have a pig up there, which would get cut up later on. But all of those things went for homes were built, and the dad and mom's home was on property that had been inherited by them from their father, which was our great-grandfather. And so they were given a lot to build a home on. My Uncle Albert got a lot. We had one aunt, Dad's sister, who lived in Woodruff, Utah. She had a lot there if she ever wanted to come down and build a home in Bountiful. So, and then he sold lots off. Grandpa sold lots off. There's one of the ways that he, got income as time went on. But anyway, in 1937, I remember that we bought a new car. Now we had about a 28 Shiv up till that time. And and one of the things about the car was, and Norma Jean will remember some of these things. Some of these.
Yeah, I remember the 1937 car. I took my driver's test in that.
Right, you would have. And,
We had it a long time.
but also, even in the old car, I still remember before we got this, and after we got it, on Sundays, we took grandmother and grandfather Holbrook for a ride.
Mm-hmm.
Church was in the morning, and then you went home and came back for sacrament meeting at night. Y'all remember that?
Mm-hmm.
So in the interim, we would go for a ride. And a lot of times we'd end up at Colville Ice Cream Company in Salt Lake, which
yes, that was the highlight.
yeah, that was the highlight. When we would have a nice ice cream cone, and I remember Norma Jean would always stand up. Not when grandfather and grandmother were there so much, but whenever she would get in the car, she always stood up on the back seat. And then one thing I'll have to just tell you about Norma Jean, that the people that the parents put up with, she had an imaginary friend.
That's right.
What was she called? Little Uber. Something like that. Anyway, this imaginary friend. And the parents we'd start out, and Lulu would be standing at the side of the road wanting a ride, and we'd have to stop and open the door to tell Jean that she was in the car.
No, wait, so
That's right.
what was your friend's name?
What?
What was her name?
Wasn't it Lulu?
That was Kristen.
You know, I've almost forgotten. I can't remember what her name was, but yeah, she was a girl. She also lived in the corner of the kitchen, so if I didn't feel like eating, I would turn and talk to her in the corner all through the meal.
Yeah, she was
But they were patient. They let me do it.
She was every place that Norma Jean wanted her to be. What I will say is Dad put up with that. A lot of things he would not put up with, but he did with Norma Jean and her friend. So
That's right.
we do give him credit for that. Well, I have to tell you now just a couple of things here. During the war years, 41, we got into the war. Norma Jean and I, of course, were still in school. But things were such that the school teachers would work part-time at Hill Air Force Base.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad would go up after school each night, 5 days a week. They would leave school. They'd take three of the teachers that were from Bountiful would go work at Hill Air Force Base. Dad worked in the shipping department, which shipped airplane parts all over the world, wherever they were needed for the Air Force. I don't know what the other two did, but they went up. They would leave school. They'd take turns driving, so that and they would go up to Hill Air Force Base and put in, I don't know how many hours, but I don't think that he usually got home much before 11 o'clock, you know.
Mm-mm. No, I remember. Yeah.
And
No, I don't remember what time he got home, but I remember all of his going there. Yes.
and so that was one of the things that they did to help the war effort, because they needed the help, and these teachers would go up after, and a lot of teachers were in other areas where they were helping the armed forces, and so that was one of the things that went on during our life. Dad was always active in the church. He was in a bishopric. He taught Sunday school for years and years. I don't know. It seemed like he taught the gospel doctrine class in Sunday school for a long time.
Yeah, he did. He was still teaching it when we were old enough to go.
That's right. And then they would call him back, and he would teach it further. He, like I say, was in a bishopric, and I remember once he said to me, and I was, of course, in the Aaronic priesthood, and then he said to me, "Now I'm in the bishopric, and but I'm not going to demand that you be to church." He says, "I want you there because you want to be there." That's what he said. I should always remember that.
Mm-hmm.
But I was always there. I always loved church. But anyway, he was on the city council for 4 years, and the Just the Peace, and all of these things which he helped build up Bountiful.
Keep it going now.
We had this. I'm just going to cover really quick. We had a company called the Holbrook Realty at one time. He worked part-time in the real estate business. We had the Holbrook Realty Company, but we had a bad experience in that when we went to try and build a subdivision. We had someone that was actually a banker who was not handling the funds right, and really cost us more money than we could afford. And so we had to close up, and we sold off the rest of the subdivision. And at that time I was studying the appraisal profession, which I ended up going in full time, after that anyway. But that was one of the bad experiences we had. He was in the Lions Club for at least 60 years, and was a very faithful Lions Club member, and helped them out in all of their things. As we grew up, we didn't do a lot of things as a family. We go on these rides and things, but we would go up to Mueller Park once in a while with friends of theirs and children, and we would do those things which were fun to do. And anyway, he died at 90 years old, and he loved family reunions when they all got together. And we used to do that at Como Springs all the time. And he loved that when he got with his brothers and sisters and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But
and all of our cousins.
Yeah.
Right. We liked that too, didn't we, Dean?
did for their cousins. So,
Saw all of our cousins at those reunions that we didn't see other times of the year. Yeah.
but anyway, he died at 90 years old. Told the doctor when he was 89 he'd like to be 90 because no Holbrook had ever reached 90. And, the doctor said, well, I think you got a good year and your birthday comes during that year, so you should make it. And he did. And he died right after his 90th birthday. So that's kind of his story.
How long did he work at Turkey Shoot up at the gun range?
Oh, he worked up there from the time he retired. I could think maybe for 10 years at least. 10 years up there.
Turkey Shoot, is that still in operation?
Yes, they still have. They still have.
He had quite the gun collection, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Like
Yeah, that we sold most of it, except for a couple of these older guns, which we kept. But okay, well that's Dad. Now it's taken a while. I don't know whether you want to go through Mother tonight or not.
do Mother another time.
Yeah, maybe so.
That'd probably be best.
Does
What-
Norma
what-
Jean have anything?
Yeah, what do you think, Norma Jean, if we did another one of these where we talked about your mother?
That sounds good. Yeah,
Yeah,
that sounds good.
okay.
She had an interesting life too, and
Yeah,
just their meeting was interesting. So I think we could cover that another time
So I have one
or
question.
whatever you do.
So when you went to your family reunions, so who were the cousins that, well, Dad said he had a lot of older cousins, much older than you, but
Well, yeah, the Cornea family who lived out in Randolph, Utah, which is up, near Evanston, Wyoming. They had a large family, and they had children the same age as they had some older children, but they also had children Dean's age and my age. And so those were cousins that we saw that we liked seeing at the reunions. We did have cousins who were a lot older than we were too, but that family had, I think, one child younger than me, and then one my age, and a couple of them were near your age, weren't they, Dean? They had a lot of children.
Yeah,
So,
one was pretty much the same age as I was.
right, yeah, the Cornea family. They were sheep herders, or well, they weren't all sheep herders. Their father was he and his brother had a sheep ranch out in Woodruff, Utah. So that's where they lived. So we didn't see them. Sometimes one or two of them would come down to visit our grandmother, but otherwise to see the whole family, we would go to Como Springs. Yeah, it was a big day.
that's fun.
It was fun.
I do. I don't remember.
Well,
Okay,
it's
so-
fun. That's great.
All right.
All right.
Does Norma Jean have anything else about?
Yeah, anything else on Norma Jean?
No, it was fun to tune in. Sorry I was a little late, but it was interesting because I thought, well, I've got to make sure that Dean has maybe going to say something about the justice of the peace part of the life. And as soon as I got there, as soon as I got in, I could hear him telling the story of the big trial anyway. And so that was, that's great.
Well, I just want to
It's
tell you,
fun.
I want to just tell you one thing about Norma Jean, and then I'll quit.
Oh,
Norma Jean was, what should I say? She would get mad at the family sometimes. And one day she said, I'm going to run away. So Mother packed her a lunch.
that's right. They weren't going to miss me.
And we wished her well, and she ran away.
Yeah.
Down to
Do you know where I went?
the-
I went up around the corner and ate the lunch up by the creek.
she went down around the corner and then out of sight. and ate her lunch.
That's right.
And then she returned home.
That's right. And they all welcomed me. We're so glad you're back.
That was her. Just seeing she's on the phone, I just thought I'd tell you that story.
That's right.
Yeah, I tell a dad story.
Anything about Dean you want to tell us while you're?
Well, one time Dean and I played a game, and the prize was this big teddy bear that I had, and he won it. And then he tied it up in the backyard and used it for a tackling dummy. And that really hurt my feelings. So there's a story about Dean. Do you remember that, Dean?
Yeah, remember.
Okay. Okay.
And Christine has a request here.
There was a story told at Grandpa's funeral about Aunt Norma Jean, and I think it was Darren Parkin in a policeman's motorcycle out front. What is that story? Remind me.
Oh, well, it was one of the policemen who was a motorcycle policeman who had come to see my dad. This was during this Justice of the Peace time. And I got on the motorcycle and tipped it over. And it punctured the gas tank. So that was well, Daryl was with me. Daryl and I got into a lot of trouble together. But I was the one who climbed on the motorcycle. And we just stood there and looked at it and didn't know what to say or do. And of course, we were soon discovered, and they came out, and then the motorcycle had to be hauled away, I guess, to have the gas tank repaired. So we had a few infamous times.
Now I'll tell you what the end of that story was. The motorcycle officer said that it wasn't, it was a leak, but not really bad. But he said, I had to fill it up twice getting it back to headquarters.
Oh, is that it? Okay. See, you remember some part of the story I'd forgotten, Dean.
I remember that part of the story. Well,
I was too traumatized by having tipped it over, I think.
well, it's nice to hear your voice.
Oh, you too.
I think we'll call this history lesson over at this point.
Okay. All right. Well, good night, everybody.
17th of April is probably when we're doing this again, about 6 o'clock.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thanks. See ya. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.